This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by TikiPod. There's definitely no doubt that the classic arcade hit Gauntlet is a shooting game. It could definitely have used some extra controls though. Confused Pelican and TikiPod seems to have thought so too, as they've put together a great homage to the Gauntlet formula complete with twin-stick controls, a randomized layout, and 4-player co-op.
Iron Crypticle is a twin-stick roguelike shooter that was released to the Nintendo Switch on February 13th, 2019. It was also released to the PlayStation 4 on July 11th, 2017, and to Steam and Xbox One the next day. The Nintendo Switch is identical to the others, with the added bonus of being able to be played on the go. Let's take a closer look.
There are a lot of roguelike shooting games out there these days, but Iron Crypticle is definitely one that feels more at home in this genre subset. Players move their chosen knight around the screen with twin-stick controls. Movement is handled with the left analog stick, and axes can be thrown in an independent direction with the right analog stick.
Players also have a couple of special abilities to help them in tough situations. A dash can be performed with the R button, which moves the player quickly in one direction to either dodge fire or close the gap on an enemy or disappearing item. The dash can even damage enemies. However, it feels pretty clunky at the best of times, especially versus foes. It also has a cooldown, so care should definitely be taken.
The player also has access to a bomber attack called the Atomic Fist, which will clear enemies within a certain radius. This attack is deployed with the L button and can be super helpful if players get overwhelmed with a particularly dense or speedy enemy mob, and no other special weapons are available.
In addition to the player's regular slow firepower, a number of special weapons can randomly appear in any given room. Only a few of these weapons can appear on the outset, but as the game is played more and more, additional weapons will be unlocked, and some of them, like the shotgun, are super powerful. Additional items will also unlock in this manner, including experience items, enhancements like running shoes, and runic scrolls. In the case of runic scrolls, several exist and can be held for later use. The player can use their scroll by pressing the B button, with effects ranging from huge attacks to defensive shields.
As players defeat more enemies and pick up more items, they will gain experience for their knight, indicated in the player's status window. At level up, the player will gain 1 health point in addition to their default 3. Additional items can also be found to boost various attributes such as fire speed, attack power, special weapon duration, and more. These modifiers can even be triggered by collecting a huge amount of maximum multiplied foodstuffs, which we'll take a look at further in the scoring section.
Iron Crypticle is played over a huge amount of room-sized stages, over 67 when things really get going. These rooms span a number of floors, which vary according to the game mode selected. Starting on the left side of the map, players travel from room to room in a branching manner until they eventually make it to the boss room on the other side of the floor. At first, each floor is blanked out with the player unable to see what's ahead. Thankfully, collecting the map item will open the whole floor up for the players to make a more strategic route to the boss.
There can be a number of challenging special rooms on any given floor in Iron Crypticle which incorporate powerful enemies or large mobs, or both. On the other hand, there are also rooms that can help the player. An arcade machine can be found which lets players run a side-scrolling action platforming stage for extra pointage, coins, and life, as well as a shop featuring one of the cats from AquaKitty, which allows players to buy upgrades and items. Take too long on any regular room though, and you'll be hunted down by super strong, unkillable enemies.
Every floor has a boss that needs to be dealt with. Many of these bosses have several parts that need to be destroyed or avoided to get through to its weak point. Special weapons do a good job of damaging bosses in an efficient manner, and thankfully, they will appear at random throughout the fight. The bosses in Iron Crypticle can be quite challenging, but reward the player with a number of high-value items, extra life recovery, and more when defeated.
There are even a bunch of special collectibles that can do wonders for progression. A room clear will occur if players spell out bonus with randomly appearing tiles and collecting a full complement of gemstones. These gemstones will trigger a fantastic effect that just has to be seen to be fully appreciated. Some of these collectibles can also be purchased in the shop for players a little less patient to have them just appear.
But is it any fun? Heck yes it is! Especially with multiple players, Iron Crypticle is a real blast to play. Delegating, or straight up ripping off and hoarding, various power-ups and food items can be a blast with the right group of friends, and getting to the end on fewer credits is bound to be a challenge with so many players.
Of course, even when playing alone, Iron Crypticle is a great game to pick up and play, with a fresh stage set every time it's fired up. There's even an unlockable New Game Plus that expands the crypt for players to find the real treasure. Iron Crypticle also sports a number of difficulty options and even an endless mode. Of course, even after all of that, Iron Crypticle's online leaderboards definitely help in extending players' time with the game. The online leaderboards in Iron Crypticle are a great way to get some longevity out of this title, and there are all kinds of ways to get a high score. Obviously, killing enemies and grabbing as much treasure as possible is going to do a decent job of getting the player's points up, but there are also other ways to get a great score.
First up, collecting regular food items will start a multiplier. So long as another food item is collected without getting hit within a certain amount of time, the multiplier will grow to a maximum of 8 times. The 8 times multiplier is displayed with rainbow colors, so it's super obvious to the player when it happens. Once again, these max multiplied foodstuffs are important in triggering stat increase items, so the more that are collected, the better.
There are other foods, as well as rare and magical items that also build up the player's score, and the larger they are, the more they are typically worth. Players can find huge slices of cake, for example, that are worth multiple thousands of points. But these special foods do not count towards the multiplier of regular food, and it can sometimes be hard to tell which do or don't. The non-multiplied food, therefore, can be seen as decoys in a lot of ways.
Arcade rounds can also yield multiple thousands of points. Collecting cake and pie through the side-scrolling stages of the arcade bonus rounds will award the player extra points in the thousands, in addition to health replenishment.
Bosses are definitely where the largest point payouts exist, with tens of thousands of points awarded through various treasures dropped by the stage's big baddie. Believe it or not, beyond all of this, there are all sorts of other ways to get points in Iron Crypticle too, like collecting all of the bonus tiles or all of the gemstones. Really, there's way more than we can go over here without putting some of you to sleep. So, needless to say, players looking to score high have no shortage of ways to do it. Iron Crypticle definitely has a distinct style that Tikipod is well known for at this point. Its premise is absolutely fitting too. The king's treasures, and the queen, have been stolen, and his cadre of slacking knights now have to dive into the depths of the palace's crypts in order to retrieve them.
Iron Crypticle's visuals are primarily sprite-based, and while they're pretty standard stuff for the most part, they still do a good job of depicting everything players see and encounter. Subtle lighting effects keep things from being too dark and gloomy, and enemy shots are pretty easy to pick out. The character, item, and enemy design are all pretty decent here as well. Most elements have a good amount of animation to them, which livens up the screen and keeps this style of visuals from looking too boring. There are even some really clever visual cues, such as how the player's character bleeds on his last health point to let the player know at a glance that they are in danger.
On the sound front, things aren't quite as strong. The soundtrack in particular isn't quite up to the level of quality that Aqua Kitty was, for example. That's not to say it's badly composed, it's just a little bland. The title and boss themes are pretty good though. Meanwhile, the sound effects are serviceable on the whole, with very little in the way of irritating effects, which is always a plus. Well, except for the character collision and death sounds. They kind of got under our skin a bit.
Iron Crypticle also has a good amount of extras when it comes to the collectibles in the game. A compendium known as the Ledger contains a record of every collected item in the game, complete with written entries and even the sound effect they make when collected. A number of hidden challenges that unlock like achievements are also included, which increases the replay of Iron Crypticle even more.
Rounding out the presentation is a clean, easy to see and navigate menu system, a great, concise interface, and one of the best in-game manuals we've seen so far. This is pretty neat. There are also a number of different screen effects that can be applied to the game as well. So, how does Iron Crypticle stack up? Let's take a look. Controlling the player's characters is pretty intuitive, and none of the controls are out of the way on the Switch controller.
The dash mechanic does feel a bit clunky though.
Iron Crypticle starts off hard, but gradually becomes more accommodating as more abilities, items, and weapons are unlocked.
Multiplayer games can be frantic, strategic, methodical, or all of the above. It can get pretty challenging, especially with limited continues.
With over 60 stages, over 6 floors, and with multiple difficulties and modes, there are all kinds of secrets to find, items to unlock, and an infinite number of rooms to explore in Iron Crypticle.
The online leaderboards add long legs to an already extensive game.
Iron Crypticle's pixel visuals are serviceable and pretty clearly visible, even in the darkest rooms of the crypt.
The huge wealth of items and pickups remind us a lot of Bubble Bobble.
The sound in Iron Crypticle is a little on the weak side, but it still works, just not as well as Aqua Kitty.
We didn't care for the collision hits and death sounds of the player knights though.
The Gauntlet-style gameplay really works with the twin-stick-style control, random power-ups, randomized roguelike nature, and gradual unlockable bits. New Game Plus is a fantastic addition.
The on-the-go gameplay also does the Switch version of Iron Crypticle, in particular, all kinds of favors.
Iron Crypticle was a neat surprise in our inbox when it was sent along. TikiPod is doing great things with older concepts. We wonder what they might be able to accomplish with, say, a Toaplan game in the future. Until then, though, Iron Crypticle is a game that we're sure to revisit with even more players in the future, and it gets a 4 out of 5. You can get a copy of Iron Crypticle on all major platforms today. I really dug Iron Crypticle. We need to get our friends in on that one for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Mick is definitely getting in on that chaos.
Well, next up is Rib 9000, and that one is, something.
Yeah, you have fun with that one.
One way that we can get to producing content full-time is through Patreon. Consider supporting Studio Mudprints and Bullet Heaven for as little as $1 an episode. If we can get 6% of our viewership on board, we can go full-time and actually stay on top of those Day Zero reviews and much more. Links below.